Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we will be exploring forgiveness. With me is Richard Smoley, who is the author of The Deal, the Guide to Radical and Complete Forgiveness. Richard is also the editor of Quest, the Journal of the Theosophical Society in America, and the author of many other books, including Inner Christianity, the Guide to the Esoteric Tradition, and Conscious Love, Insights from Mystical Christianity, and How God Became God, what scholars are really telling us about God and the Bible. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Forgiveness is, in many ways, a mysterious and paradoxical topic, but I suppose from a Christian perspective, it really goes back to the Lord's Prayer.
Yes, it does. And if you look at the Lord's Prayer in the original Greek, the New Testament was all written in Greek, or just about all written in Greek first. Mm-hmm. The line in the Lord's Prayer says, "Forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors." Mm-hmm. This is a little different because the word is actually debts. And it is as we have forgiven. Mm-hmm. So that means it gives us a little bit of an obligation to do the forgiving first before we can expect it for ourselves.
It also seems to be an echo of the Jewish notion of the Jubilee year, every 50 years in which all debts are forgiven.
Yes. There's a point, both of them reflect a very, very valid point, which is there's some stage at which just the board has to be cleared. Mm-hmm. And in fact, there are economists today who are saying, one thing is maybe we should just forgive a lot of this staggering debt that everybody owes to everybody else from a purely financial point of view. Mm-hmm. From an individual point of view, debts range from everything to everything. Mm-hmm. That is to say, it could amount to genuine offenses, things that people did that really hurt you. But people also have a lot of grievances and grudges about perfectly trivial things. Mm. I sent them a Christmas card. They didn't send me a Christmas card. Who do they think they are? Mm-hmm. Is it a sin not to send someone a Christmas card? Not in any ethical book that I've ever read. Mm-hmm. But people do take these things to heart and they worry about them.
Yeah. Well, and holding a grudge, I think most psychologists would agree, it's harmful to the person who holds the grudge.
Yes. And, my book is entitled, A Guide to Radical and Complete Forgiveness. So why radical and complete? Well, the first thing is, based on what you've just said, is that forgiveness is a matter of self-interest. This is the most important point to start with when we're talking about forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Most people are reluctant to forgive because they think they're doing somebody else a favor. And of course, it's someone whom they don't feel they owe any favors to. Mm-hmm. But no, it has very little to do with the other person, what the other person thinks. Very likely the other person has no idea of your grudges against him. It's for your own benefit to let these things go. These things are poisoning your life. Mm-hmm. And the extent that you let them go is the extent to which you can see your life that much more clearly and that much more vividly and live that much more productively.
And yet, there's another point of view. We see it all the time in literature and in film, and the idea of revenge and how that brings focus to people and how important it is to get revenge. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Well, the greatest work of art about revenge is the Oresteia of Aeschylus, written in the 5th century BC. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that Orestes has to kill his mother because in those days you were duty bound to do this. Mm. If someone killed someone in your family, you were duty-bound to kill them. Well, in this case, it happens to be his mother, so he has to kill her. And then the Furies in the myth rise up from his mother's blood and start chasing him around. And finally, the gods step in and say, this all has to stop. We have to have what the Greeks called themis, what we call law, some sort of principle of order whereby this constant retribution, the lex talionis, just has to stop. As we know, there are cultures where these vendettas are carried on for hundreds of years.
You use that phrase, lex
talionis. It's simply Latin for the law of retaliation. And that just goes on and on. Our culture, we've embraced law. That is to say, if someone murders someone close to me, I do not have the right to retaliate. It is for the law to avenge.
Yes.
And that is a better way of doing it, I think, however imperfect our legal system may be. But with a lot of things, how can I forgive this person? And then the far more thorny question, how can we forgive? All of these crimes in the world, all of these atrocities, which I will not even bother to name, how can we forgive them? And this is very interesting because, in my view, the ego here is setting itself up as kind of a moral authority that's presuming or wishing it could speak for everybody. Can we really forgive X for blowing up Y? Well, I don't know who's this we anyway. I don't actually really have the right to speak for anybody else. And quite frankly, my going around being upset at this person for doing something that doesn't affect me is frankly not very productive. And you will get people who are literally upset because they feel they should be holding these grievances against, the latest criminals against humanity or the great criminals of history. But these people are either gone or out of reach, so it's not affecting them, but it's gnawing up you as you're going through this and chewing it over in your mind.
Well, there are those who would say that forgiveness ought not to be too quick. I know some people will forgive immediately, but what about restitution?
Well, I think there are two things at hand. One is claiming your due. And no, people do often mistakenly, in my view, believe that forgiveness is being a doormat. I don't believe that's the case. I think, well, all right, if you can, get your due back. In a sense, you owe it to yourself. But then you get into lawsuit land. And my understanding of lawsuit land, which I have, thank all the powers of heaven, not really very much experience of, is it rapidly ceases to be about restitution, and it rapidly starts to be about retribution and punitive damages, and let me pursue this to punish the person even though I'm bankrupting myself on lawyers. That is where the mentality goes.
Every person I know, including myself, who've ever been involved in lawsuits, would say it's a huge emotional drain.
Yeah. And so it's one thing, well, if you can, maybe you can, but, do you want to waste 5 years of your inner life? Or maybe you can seek retribution without saying, all right, look, I've just got to be clean with it myself. I similarly, maybe you have an abusive family member.
Okay.
You need to draw the line at this.
Yeah.
And in fact,
you certainly don't want to forgive someone if the offense is ongoing.
No. But I can easily imagine a case like this. A woman has a husband who beats her all the time. She puts up with it for years. She's mad, makes excuses. And finally, one day, she sort of decides in her head, I really forgive old Ed. I really do forgive him. And it's time to go. Sometimes, and I think more often than we like to believe, this act of inner forgiveness, of letting go, is a way of cutting the strings that bind you negatively, particularly to close family members and spouses and so on.
I see.
So forgiveness can be a way of cutting the Gordian knot.
Uh-huh. And that's important because you can walk away from a situation if there's ongoing offenses.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, and then, of course, if you're staying with a person, well, you know, are you putting up with someone who's abusing you? Well, of course, that is called enabling. It's called codependent behavior, and that's not healthy either. Mm-hmm. I would say that it's a somewhat false form of forgiveness, and so I would not equate forgiveness in any genuine sense with enabling or codependency. Mm-hmm. Although I can often see how that mistake might be made.
Yeah. Well, you talk about radical and complete forgiveness, and I think it also has to do with forgiving oneself.
Yes. And the exercise in this book, The Deal, is it's a fairly simple one, and I outline it in the book. And of course, it has to be a matter of forgiving oneself. Do you want to be forgiven? A very, very common automatic response to is, well, I don't feel I can be forgiven. I don't feel, you know, will happen or something, or, you know, God. But that's not really the question asked. Do you want it or not? Mm-hmm. Do you want it? Well, it actually is available to you. Yeah, you have a condition. You have to give up all your other grievances. Why do you have to do that? Is it some kind of like economic trade-off? Mm-hmm. Yes and no.
An equation?
An equation, yes. Because if you don't let everything go against yourself and everybody else, from, you know, mean old daddy to the great monsters of history, if you don't let it all go, you're going to start with this process of, well, whom do I owe forgiveness to and who don't I? And all of these calculations and all of these grievances lock back in, and before you know it, you haven't gone anywhere. Because deciding who you should forgive and who you shouldn't forgive, and that kind of moralizing judgment is just going to waste your energy. Just let it all go for your own self-interest.
Well, what you're saying essentially is let's accept the universe as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, without being walked on, without, you know, putting up with injustices. What about the injustices of the world? Well, people are terribly upset by all of these things, and people are glued to their news screens, being upset by them. This does no good whatsoever. And you may feel like you're a good person for watching all this stuff and saying, wow, how horrible this is. But this is helping nobody. Least of all the people who are suffering. Oh, by the way, you know, you lost a child, or your house floated down the river. Yeah, do you really want someone shoving a microphone into your face and asking you to share your feelings for the entertainment of the home audience? I don't think so. So I think this whole newsization of it itself is a bit poisonous. But if you can just let it all go, there's a lot in the world that you have to accept because you have no other choice. All of these things you read about in the papers, all this sort of thing, you have no handle in it. And upsetting yourself over something that you have no control over anyway is very, very unhealthy, I believe, from a mental point of view.
Well, you seem to be saying you can forgive somebody and still hold them accountable.
Yeah, yeah. But be careful about just letting your grievances all come back, you know. And there's a point at which you say, well, yeah, you owe me $1,000. I want this $1,000 back. You owe it to me. And, all right, well, this person may not give it to you. There may be a point at which you said, all right, you know, I stated my case, and I better get on with my life. Realistically, most people know, and they give people certain amounts of money that they're never going to see it again, and whether it's called a loan or not. So I believe a certain amount of realism is called for. That is to say, you do have boundaries and you have limits that you will not allow to be transgressed. But on the other hand, you're not willing to like punish yourself for every mistake you've made or monger guilt. And a lot of guilt mongering is, I feel guilty and I'm trying to sell it to you. In fact, usually there's some element of that.
It seems to me that also we need to take into account what leverage we may have in a given situation.
Yeah.
If it's political, well, I have a vote.
Yeah.
I can at least exercise my power to vote. I may disagree with what some politicians have done, and I may be willing to forgive them because they had their reasons, but I'm not going to vote for them again.
No. I mean, there's certainly no reason to vote for someone you disagree with or who you think is dishonest. Mm-hmm. If you feel invested enough in it, well, maybe you want to campaign for the candidate that you like. Mm-hmm. But the thing about these larger causes, and yes, it's worth investing in them, mm-hmm. but very soon you'll see that there are only a few, like maybe one, that you can really invest in any sense, real sense of investing time and money where you're going to do anything. Mm-hmm. And everybody has their own little work to do in the world. Yeah. I can't tell you yours because I'm damn lucky if I know my own.
Well, mine right now is doing these interviews. No,
that's more power to you. That's all I can say. But I'll give you an example. And this doesn't mean apathy or just indifference or selfishness. Mm-hmm. What does your work mean in this sense? Well, I have a very close old friend who lost his daughter at the age of 4 to some rare form of lymphoma, and obviously, this was heartbreaking to him and his wife. Yeah. And one way they decided to take on the work of healing it was to start kind of a hospice for children who were suffering from cancer in Bolivia. Mm-hmm. I think they picked Bolivia because there's a nanny. Maybe the daughter even had a nanny that they were close to. Okay. All right, well, that's their work. That they found that, and unfortunately, it was in a rather sad, tragic way, but that's their work.
Well, people in that circumstance, I would imagine, go through a phase where they feel they've got to work through, can they forgive God for taking away an innocent child?
Yeah. And, there's always this question of, can we forgive God? Mm-hmm. Now, that brings up another subject that I think is important to face in all of this. I think, as you may have already gathered, I think forgiveness is a good idea. Mm-hmm. As good as it is, I think honesty is still better. That is to say, I have not forgiven this person yet. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm willing to in the long run. I'd like to. I'm even trying to. But there's a lot here that I haven't let go of. And you better be real with yourself about it, because then one thing you don't want to be, above all else, is a phony to yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all are a little bit that way to the world, and that's kind of the way the world is, but for God's sake, you have to be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And it's a process. It takes time.
Yes, it does.
Depending on the degree of hurt and transgression.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, the thing in the deal is, as I say, it is a process. Depending on where you are in your life, it could be the beginning of it, or, it could be a fairly late stage of it. It's not for me to decide when you should take it. You can do it anytime you like. The book comes into your hands and you say, well, this is actually for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's time.
Well, let's review it, though. The deal is, if I understand it correctly, I will forgive everybody who has ever transgressed against me, and what I want in return is to be forgiven for everything I may have done. Mm-hmm. So it's forgiveness all the way around.
Mm-hmm. As the Course in Miracles says, all gifts I give are given to myself. Mm-hmm. You cannot forgive others without forgiving yourself, or accepting forgiveness for yourself. You cannot accept forgiveness for yourself without forgiving others. Why? Because these others, for the most part, are figures in our head that may or may not have anything to do with the actual people who are running around. Mm-hmm. What you are forgiving often is like my mental picture of, the nasty 6th grade teacher or grandpa or whatever. You were forgiving elements, in a way, of yourself. Mm-hmm. So that is, in a sense, it. Now, I will say, when I wrote this book about in the summer of 2013, 3 years ago from now. And it was a genuine organic process that I went through. I didn't come up with an idea to write this book and try it myself. The process arose in myself as a result of certain things in my life, and the book came later. Now, I certainly did it in all sincerity, but I realized 3 years later, there are lots of levels of grievances that I didn't really touch. And it's only been in recent months that I've sort of seen, wow, how a certain kind of attitude of disgruntledness has held me back in life.
Layers of the onion.
Yeah, layers of the onion. And, it's like, wow, this attitude of some kind of, kind of a grumpy, disgruntled attitude toward the world that, I've kind of carried around with me. And I've looked at it in the light of my past, and I've seen just how much it's held me back.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing you can do about the past as usual, but at least I can hope not to let it hinder me in the future.
Every now and then, for myself, I may have a memory that just pops into my mind through association or maybe even out of the blue where I was mean to somebody. For example, I was mean once to a schoolmate in the 6th grade. And I realized I have no idea how to contact this person. I'm not sure I wish to, but in my own mind, I try to ask to be forgiven and to forgive myself for what I did.
Well, I think most people with, some kind of spiritual attitude toward life have some idea of how to send blessings. That is to say, to mentally send blessings to someone.
Yeah.
Peace, love, you call it what you like.
Healing,
whatever you like. And to do that mentally is universally said to actually have real effects. Even if talk to this person, even if the other person is not conscious that you're doing it. Probably it's better to do that than to call them up and say, because what are you going to have, an awkward conversation that probably will leave you and him feeling worse.
Yeah, like you remember 60 years ago when I threw that snowball at you?
I have things like that come up for me. And, I think, with a lot of it internally, it's like, well, just it comes up, let it go, comes up, let it go, send blessings to the person. As you know, I have a very, very high respect for A Course in Miracles.
Yes.
It's a spiritual text. And one piece of advice it gives is to say, well, one thought in particular should be remembered throughout the day. It's a thought of limitless joy, of peace, of universal release. And I think that is a very, very useful day-to-day, almost moment-by-moment spiritual practice. You can then send it to this person, send it to the world. The world certainly seems to need it. Every day the world seems to need it more than others previously. So that kind of mental process, A, is said by all authorities to have real palpable effects, even though you can't see them, and B, it's good for you too.
I hold to that. I do. Just somehow it rings true to me, and I suppose, whenever it's possible to pay it forward, to do something, maybe you can't go back to the 6th grade and correct what was done a long time ago, but you can do something in the physical world to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, my operating principle is if you can do something kind, do it. If you can avoid doing something unkind, avoid it. Now, there are times when, the mood just isn't there, but usually you can catch yourself. I had a very instructive story. It was at a health food store in San Francisco, and it was in the days before debit cards.
Yes.
And I was waiting in line, and I don't know, I didn't really like the way that they were handling the next person who was taking too long. I was about to say something sarcastic to the clerk, but something told me to keep my mouth shut. And I paid with a check, because it was those days, and he looked at it and said, "Oh, wow, I really admire your work." And I had to say, he'd have recognized it from Gnosis. Oh, wow, thank you. If I'd been nasty to him, it probably would have been that much more annoying than from, just a typical obnoxious.
Yes, the famous author came in, what a jerk he was.
Yeah, so I was glad whatever little voice I had that told me to do that was did me a favor.
Yeah. Well, that's a good maxim. Avoid being a jerk whenever possible.
Yeah. And, if we're being honest with ourselves, it isn't always possible.
Yeah.
There are times when just something comes out or you don't catch yourself in time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're human. And we live in a world that likes, irritations are very present and everybody takes them very seriously. But, let them go as much as possible for your own peace of mind. Mm-hmm. It does require a certain amount of mental discipline. It's not, although it becomes easy and it's certainly much more pleasant than, nursing these grudges. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does require a little bit of inner discipline, a little practice, but I think it's a very rewarding one.
And I suppose it's fair to say that the notion of forgiveness is especially prominent in Christianity.
Yes. Let me look at it another way, if you want to go back to Christianity, because, in fact, let's talk about something ostensibly non-Christian, which is karma.
Yes.
Karma is the law of retribution, cosmic retribution. You did something bad, it's coming back to you. If you did something bad in one lifetime, it's coming back to you. Maybe several lifetimes later, right? We all know that. And most people, I think, consciously know and intuit that, the universe does kind of work this way.
As you sow, so shall you reap. Isn't that in the Bible?
Yeah, sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the case. If that's the case, it's not necessarily very consoling in that, now the sledgehammer's over my head because I really did something wrong.
Yeah.
So what is the only way out of the law of karma? The only way out of it is to use it against itself in a kind of a jujitsu way. If you forgive others, you yourself are entitled to forgiveness. So it's in a way you making a bit of a loophole in this law of karma. And I think that's one, forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. And that's why I think why it's implicit in the Gospels, but I think that's a very important part of it. Because otherwise, the sword is hanging over your head.
Richard Smoley, our time is up, but this has truly been an enlightening conversation. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for being with me. And thank you for being with us.